we have three sections in this presentation. One is the context in the geopolitics, short context in the Philippine setting. And then the third, as we always want to have a productive take-home value that is productive for everybody. After all, we're in all of these together. So first of all, it's not the politics, it's not what we think should be or should not be. Whatever we make decisions on, which defines our reality, first we have to accept what's reality and proven models that work, not just what we think should be. And it's all about decisions, because these decisions are what define the rest of the world and our milieu. And we have to look at not just the benefits or the risks, but the ratio of benefits to risks. The decision model that we choose should be something that we can use. It's useless to keep talking about things. So like Butch said earlier, that if we keep talking about things that have no use in the future or in the resolution of things, then there's not really anything we can do. So it has to be usable, it has to be verifiable, and we have to verify. We have to, it has to be widely applicable and not just to specific circumstances. And it has to be scalable. And we have to see that it has worked before and it's going to work in the future. Otherwise, the model doesn't work. And this is true whether it's in politics or in life. And the focus, we have one principle today, that we should spend less of our time, maybe 25% on history and verifying the facts, and we should not get provoked by whatever we read today. And 75% should be learning from this and actually working at it, instead of just talking about it like a lot of our think tanks and opinion makers do. So we should just work at it, and that will create the value, and regardless of what's the situation, be able to survive and prosper. So in terms of a framework, just a quick run through, we see here Asian values compared to Western values. We're not saying one is superior to the other, but one may be less controversial, less creating of confrontation than the other. So rather than fighting and confronting each other, there's a tendency to harmonize. On one hand, that makes things move more slowly. On the other hand, there's less fighting involved, right? So, and instead of dependency and entitlement, we have a reliance on the self or entrepreneurship. What the West might not understand is the Sun Tzu's idea is the greatest victory is winning the other side to your side rather than crushing them. So anyway, these are samples of Asian values that are demonstrated in history. A lot of the newspaper articles, including that recently by Justice Carpio saying that China has been invading, they don't understand that when the Mongols took over China and they invade Vietnam or other countries, it's the Mongols, it's not the Chinese. Or they say the Qing dynasty invaded this or that, the Qings are the Manchus, they're not the Chinese. This is not to say that the Chinese haven't had invasions in their history, but that means that compared to other countries, there are many occasions where they could come in and invade, but they never did. So that's the same with the experience of the Philippines and Malaysia. 100 years before Columbus, China had ships 5 times bigger, and they went around giving gifts to different countries. What the context that people fail to put in this demonization of China in recent years is, for instance, they don't indicate that China controlled, as of 2016, 7 islands. The Vietnam had 48 and Philippines had 9. So despite all the controversies, why is it that our DFA does not dispute the Vietnamese islands, including the Southwest Cay, which was taken over by Vietnam by offering women to our soldiers? No? So there are a lot of things that are not brought up. For instance, that the most frequent poachers in the Philippines are the Vietnamese, not the Chinese. The most frequent people passing without informing us are the Americans. But we're not saying this to create conflict. We believe we should be, as Roque said recently, even amidst conflict, we should be working with each other. But this is to put context to when there's so much demonization focused on China, obviously to whose benefit we have to see it. Doesn't seem to be for the Filipinos. For instance, they don't indicate Malaysia has been beating and Indonesia has been jailing and blowing up Philippine ships. They don't enter the news at all. These all can be checked and verified. So, of course, the recent event is Sabah. The U.S. apparently agrees to have Sabah belong to Malaysia. And we don't seem to question the U.S. so much about it. It's only Locsin who's questioning them. Justice Carpio and Alunan and these people, they don't seem to question this. There's no questioning of this. Risa Hontiveros doesn't question it, and so on. When we have actual contracts to show that Sabah, and look at the area, we have to be reminded Sabah has among the richest oil wells in the region. It has gold, it has forestry, it has some of the best diving sites and marine life in the area. So it's land versus fighting over water. By the way, if we look again, the Sabah has been removed by the Cory Constitution in 1987 by saying that our territories, they removed the phrase that including areas that are titled and by historic right. It's a question of why we give that out. But in the end, it's not territory. Today's fight is not territory or commodities, but it is the mental, physical infrastructure. Because if we look later, we will see the value given to tech and service companies is far greater. It is now over 70% of the value in world enterprise rather than manufacturing or commodities. That is what we have to concentrate on. And we cannot do that without peace. No? So if we see, if we're talking about bullies, they never talk about why the U.S. military budget is more than half for the U.S. budget is more than half for the military, more than the 8 other countries combined. So they would say China has this big $200 billion budget, but they don't mention the U.S. budget of $700 billion spent around the world, aside from selling arms and making profit from it. No, they don't point out that China has settled 17 out of 23 territorial disputes. In more than of these settlements, China accepted less than half the claim. That China has forgiven $4 billion in loans, suspended other loans, and forgiven the Philippines $150 million of loan of the North Rail. And they don't indicate that U.S. has invaded dozens of countries and used force continuously until today, blocking and embargoing countries. Pompeo, here, for instance, they are talking about they want to accuse the China of having started the COVID deliberately. Let us see what happens when confronted with the facts by reporters. Special. The sound. Just a moment. We'll come back to that later.
And Mr. Secretary, have you seen?
What gives you a high degree of confidence that this originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
And Mr. Secretary, have you seen anything that gives you high confidence that it originated in that Wuhan lab?
Martha, there's enormous evidence that that's where this began. We've said from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. We took a lot of grief for that from the outset, but I think the whole world can see now. Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence community continues to do its work, they should continue to do that, verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant
to point out that he says a history of people might not realize the Spanish flu in 1918 started in Kansas, USA, and killed a minimum of 50 million to 100 million people, although today they're talking about up to 50 million people at a time when the population was only 1.8 billion in the world.
amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Do you believe it was man-made?
This shows the number of biolabs. US, because they banned the bio research on viruses, they farmed it around the world, including China. And now they're blaming China.
Or genetically modified? Your Office of the DNI says the consensus, the scientific consensus, was not man-made or genetically modified.
That's right. I agree with that. Yeah, I've seen their analysis. I've seen the summary that you saw that was released publicly. I have no reason to doubt that that is accurate at this point.
Okay, so just to be clear, you do not think it was man-made or genetically modified?
I've seen what the intelligence committee has said. I have no reason to believe that they.
Okay, so that I think this, if you check the scientific literature, except for those that come directly under the U.S. government mandate, most of it around the world, including Fauci, dismisses that it was a man-made or at least that it's deliberate. Okay, and this is a, for instance, it has been shown that the research to make the viruses transferable to humans is part of U.S. research. No other country is doing this currently. This is an example we will see of the kind of news that we have to deal with. It's one-sided, and the U.S. is being involved in creating riots in the Hong Kong and paying for it, both financing it and protecting the rioters, even in the situations of creating violence. So this is what the U.S. is not showing to the U.S. public and is blocking from being sent there. All the violence that the rioters are engaged in. In fact, the law says that even if they're engaged in violence, as long as it's supposed to be pro-democracy, it will be protected by U.S. law. But if we can see also that there are many honest Americans who are actually some of the sources of this information. So we're not talking about the U.S. people in general, we're talking about government and political interests.
The protesters in Hong Kong have sent a stirring message to the rest of the world about the dreams of freedom and justice can never be extinguished by injustice and intimidation.
And I'd like to speak directly to the people of Hong Kong. America stands with you, and America will always support you. We hear you sing our national anthem. We see you carrying our American flag. This is a battle between democracy versus dictatorship, liberty versus tyranny, and freedom versus oppression.
Under the uprising, of President Xi to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is never walked alone. Hardline dictatorship. In such uphill battle,
Here now we'll see that the US, again, they're honest people, even those working for the State Department, that admits that they are funding the riots in Hong Kong and the opposition. Wait, wala.
I think it's all the Americans' fault.
It's not all our fault, but we're partially involved. We have a large consulate there that's in charge with taking care of the Hong Kong Policy Act passed by Congress to ensure democracy in Hong Kong. We also have funded millions of dollars of programs through the National Endowment for Democracy to help democracy.
So National Endowment for Democracy is the funding and policy arm of the CIA. And that is also admitted in public in video by the people who organized it, which we don't have to show today. Next. So here we see, for instance, in terms of, we're going towards the productive side, we'll start be moving there. So we're seeing here that this is the economy that we're close to. If we prospered, and the world prospered under the US before, which now has $21 trillion, China is $14 trillion in economy in nominal terms, but is 27 trillion, already higher than the US in terms of purchasing power parity. And its growth is at 6% a year as of last year, and the US is at about 2.3 to 3%. So that means within 15 years, China is going to double its economy and will be more than double the size of the US economy. If we're talking about trade, we're talking not only about trade and manufacture of goods. If we can see, for instance, that the system has actually created an intellectual powerhouse, not necessarily in all areas, but if you see here, reading, mathematics, and science, China, Singapore, Macau, Hong Kong are in the top 4. And China is 4 regions: Beijing, Shanghai, Xinjiang, and some other place. So it is already an intellectual powerhouse as well. So it is not just a matter of if they call it cheating or manufacture. We have to indicate that what they call cheating is actually negotiated the same way Philippines, Vietnam, and other countries will negotiate that if you come to our market, we would like you to teach or help us produce these items also. So if we note here, China has exceeded last year the US in number of patents filed. It has exceeded in research papers. It has exceeded in, we already know, in various infrastructures. But we have to admit also that the patents and research are notably not of the same quality yet. No? The US research is, as of now, of a far higher quality. But what we see in terms of program, if we will look at this here, the STEM students in China, there were 4.7 million last year. 4.7 million, 40% of the students took up STEM, science, technology, math, and English. And here, the US, they have 560,000. So China doesn't have to conquer anybody, doesn't have to cheat anybody. Time will be on its side simply by the way they are allocating resources to education and infrastructure rather than military adventure. So here's an example of the attitude that even amidst rivalry, there is always something positive to look forward to. This is Ren Zhengfei, the head of Huawei, the founder of Huawei.
I trust the US is a country ruled by law, so everything will ultimately be settled by the law. But sometimes I'm also very happy. The US is the world's most powerful country, and their senior officials are going around the world talking about Huawei, including places where we have not launched any advertising campaigns, and people didn't know about us. But because of this, people everywhere now know of Huawei. This is a huge advertisement for us at a very cheap price.
Cisco, Nortel, Motorola, they've all accused Huawei of stealing their ideas, stealing their technology. The United States is trying to say Huawei can't be trusted. What do you have to say about that?
In actual fact, many of our technologies are already far ahead of those by Western companies, not just in 5G or optical switching or our chipsets. The number of technologies in which we're leading is huge, and these are complex technologies. The charges that the US has made against Huawei are fairly marginal. They're not enough to say that Huawei has become what it is today by stealing from the US. Today, we have many things that the US doesn't.
So these are, we are pointing out now also in the local media how perspective is important, no? So we'll go through a few of them. For instance, when they're talking about the pointing of the radar gun at the Philippine ships, it is protocol to point radar devices at if it's shaped like a gun or whatever, at other foreign military ships, which is the case when the Philippines sent its ship. We're not saying it's right or wrong. We're saying that it's not out of line, and every country that, in fact, the US pointed actual guns at Filipino inspectors, Coast Guard, when it crashed into Tubataha Reef, no? Which it was not supposed to be there at. And the media reported this on April 2020, at the height of COVID situation, to say China is taking advantage of it, when the event actually happened in February 2020. Then we also have the flag of the province of China, the tarpaulin set up, which a picture was taken that an opposition blogger was there when it was being installed. Also, the Chinese flags being talked about being sold in Luneta turned out to have been given to the vendors by some Filipinos who told them to sell them and paid them money to sell these things. So we're not saying that what is valid or not. We're saying that we should be circumspect about what we believe in or not, and let's not get drawn into a fight that's not ours. And so here it shows the picture of the blogger, opposition blogger, no? And it also shows a ship that was not supposed to be there when they said it was supposed to be going northward, and it somehow a Liberian ship moved towards the Scarborough Shoal at that time. We're not again saying it's right or wrong. We're saying, why are these timed so perfectly whenever there's something positive about to happen with the relationship? There's always something that comes up, and it's always by the same people, and it's always from the same sources. Meanwhile, we point out that Chinese companies and philanthropists have donated between $500 million to more than $1 billion. These are donations that have hardly received any press. And the Chinoy community also has donated over $500 million already. And almost all the items that came in during the period when we needed it most and we didn't know where to get them came from these groups. More than 90% of the goods actually came from these groups, and a very big portion were donated, no? As well as from the government people, and in protection of frontliners, not just supplies, but also equipment. If we point out that people have been criticizing, and some of that there is really basis, we're not here to take sides, but we have to take into consideration something on the net, right? So if there are weaknesses in every government, we should also not forget why, if we are assessing governments, we should not point just to the good parts, but also to the weak parts. So perhaps this COVID management is something should really be improved. But we have to remember very big achievements were made that were never made before in the Philippines. No? Free tuition in public universities, massive drop in crime rates, salary increases for nurses, teachers, soldiers, Marawi terrorism resolved in 10 months versus unfinished after more than a dozen years in many countries, free internet, and so on, no? Highest employment and a tourism boom. And the most important, we forget that there's no war. There was no war with our neighboring countries. No? There are also the various donations, increases in trade, the donations for the bridges, for the South Trail, etc. The fishermen are fishing again in the Scarborough Shoals, although not at all periods in time, because there are periods where they allow the spawning to take place. So times change what's possible. For some reason, some people want to immediately go to war or provoke us into war. But we say, for instance, Japan and China are now in cooperation in COVID, producing the drugs together. Vietnam and US at war with each other only one generation ago are now friends and the biggest of allies. No? Kuomintang and CCP are now friendly with each other, North and South Korea. So over time, if we have robust relations, it could lead to a solution. So what do we have to do in business? We're talking now about the country and us individuals. For one, we are now at the perfect period in time in terms of the trends of the economy, because India, China, ASEAN, the three fastest growing regions in the world, are now our neighbors, and there is a consumer products boom that we can take advantage of, even on a small basis. I will say, for instance, our business, we have products, I'm not going to mention what, that are growing fast in these regions. And people just have to think of how they're going to do it. And if we want to discuss that at more detail, we can take another occasion. E-commerce platforms, why is Philippines with 100 million people behind Malaysia and Singapore in producing more than we are in terms of these platforms? We can also look at the companies that are failing now, including restaurants and so on, because the demand will come back. So if you're ready with your product and with your service systems, you can improve. You will eventually enter that business with a lower cost and a bigger market than before. Of course, there's also agriculture, but only if we restructure our laws and our logistics. Tourism boom will come back. That will come back. There will be outsourcing of logistics. If we look at tourism services, where are we going to head our efforts? If we look at the share of the global GDP, services now take 65%, manufacturing takes 16%, agriculture takes only 4%. So if you are going to enter business, where are you going to put your efforts and energies? That should give us some of the ideas. So there is no need, because services is where there's no need to fight or go to war, because services is where the game is at. So why is a country so willing to create conflict and go into war? The war today is economic and human resources. It is not in territory. It is in territory only for those who want a military conflict. Okay, so world tourism, we're looking for at one aspect alone. China had last year 149 million tourists and spent $277 billion. $277 billion. And they have a middle class of 700 million, of which only 150 million has traveled abroad still. Tourism to Philippines, we had only 8 million out of that, only 1.7 million out of that 150 million, and we're a neighbor. The average spend per tourist currently is about $1,000 for the Philippines, actually the lowest in ASEAN, except among the old ASEAN countries, not the new ones. The others are $2,000 to $3,000 per trip per tourist. And also that the potential is still very great. Now, we have to ask ourselves, are people willing to spend time to study the systems, to learn and to implement them? Our experience has been that suppliers won't respond to customer requests. The majority, we're not talking all, but the majority. We have been working with them through the decades. They will not work on labeling. They will not communicate changes that take place. They don't deliver as committed without informing ahead and so on. We have to change this culture. No, they don't seem to feel reliability and service is that important. We have been working with suppliers around the country. We want to buy more. We are among the top users of some of the local commodities. So right now, we have the lowest number of tourists per population, lowest spend per tourist, the best beaches and friendliest people, big opportunity. It will come back for every stage, low level to higher level. Now, steps to productive engagement on the individual level, we have to stop blaming other people and take responsibility. We cannot blame the US, we cannot blame Italy, we cannot blame China. We just have to keep on working. We have to understand reality and not just keep talking about what should be. We have to immerse. If we're immersing in social media and immersing in entertainment and Netflix, then you have to know that we're going to fall behind. No, we have to not spend that much time on pleasure and become more productive. We do instead of talking. We have too many think tanks, too many talkers. If we have a good system, we will recognize it in our life and in our country. We'll have more stability, more income, less frustration, and there will be more influence we have over our lives. Thank you very much.